Okay, welcome to the deep dive. We've got some really interesting source material in front of us today, and we are going to jump right in.
Absolutely. We're taking a deep dive into these, well, claims surrounding President Biden's cognitive state, his physical condition, too.
And these are largely coming from a new book, right? Original Sin.
That's the one. Co-authored by Alex Thompson, he's the Axios national political correspondent.
Got it. So the sources we're working with, we've got clips from a YouTube interview with Thompson talking about the book.
Yep. And some reports maybe about Congress looking into this, plus quotes from, White House folks, others close to the administration.
Okay. And our mission here, for you listening, is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, we want to unpack the main claims, the key insights from these sources,
Mhm.
focusing on, well, these allegations about trying to hide things, conceal the president's condition.
And also explore the perspectives of the people actually cited in the book.
Exactly. What are they saying?
All right, let's get into it then. The core claim, sort of the main idea of this book, according to the author, is this idea of a years-long, uh, very calculated effort
Hmm.
designed specifically to hide the president's decline, leading right up to the 2024 election.
And what's interesting when you hear the author talk about it is his view on the media coverage.
Oh, yeah.
He kind of admits that the media, and he includes himself here, maybe missed some of this, Didn't really probe enough into what was allegedly going on behind the scenes.
He makes a contrast, doesn't he, between the public, who he thinks could see this decline in real time,
Right.
and how the Washington press corps was covering it. Like, maybe a disconnect there.
Totally. And he claims, according to these sources, that people who did speak out, who pushed for answers, whether in the media or not,
Yeah.
they were often belittled or kind of, condescended to. He even said he personally felt a little bit on the outs with some colleagues.
Because he was covering it aggressively since back in 2021.
Right. And he doesn't really mince words in that interview clip we saw. He basically says people in the White House were lying and not telling the truth and obscuring it.
Wow. That's a very direct accusation from the author.
It is. And it makes you look again at the public statements from the White House, the ones from 2024 that are also mentioned in our sources.
Right, because you had those quotes flying around, calling concerning videos cheap fakes video,
Uh-huh.
claiming critics just had a credibility problem.
And describing Biden as, what was it, sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
Yeah, and another one saying he's absolutely sharp, fit, on top of his game, and that, people can see that for themselves.
So you contrast those official lines with the book's main claim.
And the author basically says, no, that wasn't the truth. He argues the book conclusively shows what was going behind the scenes.
And really pushes this idea that through 2023 into 2024, these efforts to shield Biden got more and more frantic.
And not just shielding him from the public eye,
No.
but also, according to the book, from members of his own cabinet, senior staff too. That part, that really jumps out.
It really does. And the sources give some, pretty striking examples from people cited in the book that seem to back up this idea of shielding and internal concern.
Okay, this is where it gets fascinating. According to the book, one White House official leaves in 2024.
Right.
And reportedly, part of the reason was they were uncomfortable with these very efforts to sort of hide the extent of the decline.
And the book also claims, the performance people saw in that debate, the one that got so much attention,
Yeah.
it wasn't necessarily like a sudden thing. It suggests maybe he'd shown similar behavior before.
How so?
It points to the Robert Hur investigation tapes, those interviews for the special counsel probe. The author says you could sort of hear debate Biden on those tapes already.
Okay, so suggesting the behavior wasn't totally new and the Hur tapes might show an earlier instance, that's a pretty specific claim.
It is. And then there are the concerns from cabinet secretaries. The sources mention that quite a bit.
What kind of concerns?
Well, the book cites some who apparently didn't think he could handle a, quote, 2 a.m. middle of the night phone call, like a crisis call.
Wow. A cabinet official thinking he couldn't handle a critical national security moment. That's significant, if true, what's attributed to them.
It is. And there's another one mentioned, another cabinet official,
Mm-hmm.
who was apparently shocked seeing him in person sometime in the last year. Described him as seeming disoriented, mouth was hanging open, just seemed out of it.
That's quite a description. The book also seems to get into why these officials, maybe others too, didn't speak out publicly, like their own thinking.
Yeah, it talks about this sort of rationalization, a feeling that, going public would probably just help Donald Trump.
And crucially, it wouldn't actually change Biden's mind anyway. He wouldn't step aside because they were worried.
Right. And that ties into how the book claims the inner circle managed things. By allegedly shielding him, managing his schedule really tightly, limiting who got one-on-one time, even cabinet secretaries apparently, controlling access, controlling perceptions.
Which brings us to that really striking quote that's mentioned in the sources from page 85 of the book, attributed to a longtime Biden aide.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that one.
The aide apparently said Biden just had to win and then he could disappear for 4 years.
Disappear.
Well, he'd only have to show proof of life every once in a while. His aides could pick up the slack. That's the quote.
Wow. Pick up the slack. That's quite something. And the implication the source draws from that aide's comment is pretty profound, isn't it?
Yeah, that when you vote for president, you're also, maybe mostly, voting for the unelected people around him.
The White House aides, the inner circle, the ones who might be picking up that slack.
It definitely reframes the whole thing if you accept that aide's perspective as reported.
And the book seems to explore why people might do this, why they might engage in this shielding or rationalizing.
Right. The source suggests a possible motive. If these people genuinely believe, as many Democrats do, that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy, then maybe they rationalize doing anything, including sometimes doing undemocratic things, to stop him. That's the argument presented.
And this whole picture, the one painted in the book, it also casts a spotlight on President Biden's doctor, Dr. Kevin O'Connor. The sources mentioned concerns there, too.
Yes, page 47 of the book apparently reports some people around Biden worried Dr. O'Connor might be too close to his patient.
And the sources highlight the doctor's, quote, continued resistance to ever give him a cognitive test. That's flagged as a point of concern in the book.
And this connects somewhat to the recent cancer diagnosis as well.
How so?
Well, the sources cite medical professionals, people like Zeke Emanuel, who they note is no Republican. He worked with Biden, suggesting this particular cancer might have been present for years while Biden was actually president.
So the question that raises, according to the source,
it's pretty stark. Either the doctor didn't catch it for years, which raises questions about the care, or maybe they did catch it earlier and just didn't disclose it publicly.
That's a serious implication either way.
It is, and the perception noted in the sources is that, look, Dr. O'Connor is seen as a man of integrity generally, but that he might have been pulled into what the book calls a version of a reality distortion field within that Biden orbit.
And there's also the personal connection, right? The sources mention his bond with Joe Biden goes way back, partly through caring for Beau Biden during his cancer fight.
A very deep personal history there, which might explain some of that perceived closeness.
And apparently even longtime Biden aides, according to the sources, are a bit skeptical. They feel like they don't have the full picture on the cancer diagnosis timeline.
Lots of questions raised there. And finally, the sources just briefly mention House Oversight Chair James Comer possibly wanting to probe these issues from the book.
Yeah, maybe using subpoenas to try and get more information. That's floated.
Okay, so let's just recap quickly what we've walked through in this deep dive. We've looked at these claims presented in the sources about a really systematic, years-long effort to, well, conceal aspects of the president's condition.
Right, and we've seen the tension the book highlights between the official public statements versus these alleged behind-the-scenes accounts, what people inside were supposedly saying or thinking.
We heard about the perspectives attributed to those with concerns, cabinet secretaries, aides, and the specific issues raised, things like managing access, the potential influence of unelected staff.
And those questions surrounding the medical care and disclosure, as described in the book and by the author.
And just to be clear, for you listening, we've really tried to stick just to extracting and presenting the information and the perspective from the source materials we had, giving you a sense of the claims being made.
Exactly. Just laying out what's in these particular sources.
So maybe something to leave you thinking about, especially with these claims about staff influence and the rationalizations mentioned. How do we, just as citizens trying to understand things, draw the line? Where does necessary political strategy, managing a campaign or a presidency, end?
And actions that could, as these sources allege, start to undermine transparency or even democratic norms begin.
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
It really is. It's definitely something the claims in this book force you to grapple with.